clear-cut, obvious number one overall is South Carolina, and that's going to be now why they've had some close calls. That's going to be the big question. Can anybody touch this team?
Yes, I agree. I hate picking back-to-back championship winners in my brackets because it's so hard to win back-to-back, like what we saw with Georgia this year in the college football national championship. So I'm always wary of it, but I think their odds right now on DraftKings Sportsbook are minus 200. And the next highest odds are for UConn at plus 800. And UConn's actually a two seed, which is amazing. So they've had injury issues this whole season, but they're back at almost full strength. I mean, their best player is still out for the rest of the season, but they're a 2 seed in the Virginia Tech side of the bracket. That's the 1 seed in the lower right hand if you're filling out your bracket. Right. So, I mean, I could easily see them making the final. I think I have them in the Final Four in my bracket. And UConn and South Carolina played in the national championship last year, and it was a really good game. South Carolina was dominant in it, but it wasn't, they weren't far off. So that would be not statistically a big upset, but considering how UConn's season went, and it looked like at times they were having a really disappointing season. Gino Auriemma left the team for a few weeks because he was dealing with personal issues. They've had, like I said, injury issues, but they're playing really well right now. So obviously UConn is never fully going away in women's college basketball, but there's so many other interesting teams in the bracket too that, Stanford's amazing. They had some trouble at the end of the season and in the conference tournament, but they've got 2 incredible players in Cameron Brink, who is actually a guest on Off the Looking Glass this week if people want to listen to that, and Haley Jones, and then Indiana on the other side, the other number 1 seed. I think they only lost 1 or 2 games this entire season. They're really good. Indiana and South Carolina, I think, would be an awesome national championship game. So it's going to be really fun to watch those later rounds.
What's interesting, in the top 15 on DraftKings Sportsbook, Virginia Tech is basically in the middle. They're one of the number 1 seeds. They're at plus 5,000, tied with Maryland. Again, if people don't know, number 1 seeds are South Carolina, Indiana, Virginia Tech, and Stanford. And on the women's side, that side usually holds way more chalk than the men's side, either the 1 seed or the 2 seed having the best shots in there. And you mentioned South Carolina, the only one at minus. They're at minus 200. Then you get that 2 seed in UConn. Then you get a 1 seed in Stanford. You get a 1 seed in Indiana. And then I think LSU are they a 3 seed?
They're a 3 seed, but yeah, they're an interesting team because they played really well. They won a lot of games, but when they played South Carolina earlier this year, South Carolina was dominant, and then they got upset in the SEC tournament to Tennessee.
Right.
And they're in a really difficult chunk of the bracket as well. So, I think this is an interesting year for the women's side because there's, like you said, there's South Carolina in a class of its own at the top. And then I think there's 5 or 6 teams behind them. And we haven't even talked about Iowa yet, who's a 2 seed with Caitlin Clark, who
Player of the
she's an
year,
incredible
right?
shooter.
Yeah.
Their team just scores a ton of points on offense. They're really good. But I think there's South Carolina and then like 5 or 6 teams that if any of them made the Final Four, it would not surprise me. I think the bummer with another 3 seed Notre Dame, like we mentioned last week, is that without Olivia Miles and Dara Mabry, they're not as big of an offensive threat. Those are 2 of their best players, both out. I assume Olivia Miles is out. We don't actually really know, but Notre Dame's been very quiet about it, and it looked like she had a pretty bad injury. So they're only plus 600 to win the tournament.
Yeah.
And
6,000.
Sorry, plus 6,000. You're right.
Yeah.
That is a bummer because I think there are a lot of competitive 3 seeds in this bracket, like you said, but none of them have really been able to put all the pieces together in a way that would put me, make me put them in the Final Four.
Yeah. Again, Jess and I both being Domers, that was a tough one to see. The players that are out, they take on Southern Utah, get by them. They'll probably be Creighton at the 6 seed, and then they'd have to go through if Maryland got there, the 2 seed, to keep going. They're in South Carolina's bracket too. So if somehow Notre Dame were to win a few, I just don't see them getting past South Carolina. I don't even know if they make it that far. And it's really more a testament to injuries than anything else. I mean, of what's kind of knocked them down, but so, we gave you a lot of the odds on the DraftKings Sportsbook on that one. Again, the women's side usually holds a little more to chalk than the men's side, maybe a lot more to chalk than the men's side. It is weird seeing UConn not a number 1 seed because we're so used to seeing them as a number 1 seed. That is kind of a wild thing, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think, people get sick of seeing the same teams always in it on the women's side, but that has not been the case the last few years. If you've been paying attention, there's been some really interesting runs and some teams that have kind of, come out of nowhere and been dominant. So I wouldn't expect UConn necessarily to be in the final this year, even though they're playing their best down the stretch. But I think no matter who is in the final, if South Carolina does make it through, which I think they will, like they're just so stacked. Like even their bench players are better than starters on other teams, and they have experience, and they have Don Staley, who's a really good coach, Hall of Fame coach. It wouldn't surprise me to see any of these other teams up there with them, but I would be shocked if they didn't make it to the national championship.
Let me just say, there's no way I'm betting against them. I can't think of a good reason outside of just taking a flyer.
They're on a 38 game winning streak, I believe. Their last loss was in the SEC tournament last year. But like I said, I hate picking back-to-back champions. It's really hard to repeat. So it might happen. It would just shock me.
I agree.